Now that the Super Bowl is behind us and the combine, free agency, all of this fun stuff is ahead of us, we want to make some very early Super Bowl predictions for next season. Of course, we're doing a little bit of projecting here, but it should be tons of fun. Let us know in the comments who your early 2026 Super Bowl favorite is. Let's get into it. Now, if you can't tell by the intro, I sound like I smoke about 2 packs of cigarettes a day. It's just what's the bug that's going around. So stick with me here. Amir, you're going to have to carry me throughout today's episode. But if you didn't know, or if you're living under a rock, the Chiefs did not three-peat. The Eagles came in and dominated the Kansas City Chiefs, and they won their first Super Bowl since 2017. Of course, that was when Carson Wentz got them in position, and Nick Foles finished the job. Regardless, the Eagles are your 2025 NFL Super Bowl champions. They were 18-3 this season, Amir. You see their playoff run in the middle of the screen. Utter dominance outside of that Rams game. And they were 16-1 since week 6. This is a team that was just utterly dominant. There was only 2 teams, Amir, in the NFL that had more than a one-game win streak to close out the season. The Eagles were one. Do you know who the other team was?
You said a one game win streak
More than a one-game win streak.
or more than a one. Wait, it was the Eagles and then it was like the Rams or something.
No, it was the Rams lost in the playoffs. It was the team that has the best quarterback in the league, Joe Burrow and the Bengals. They won 5 in a row to end the season. But the Eagles, man, we talked about it off the pod. They have a legitimate shot to become the next dynasty.
Yeah,
And we always want to say
they
that
do.
with caution because we always say this about every Super Bowl team. It seems like all these teams are unbeatable. But then the next season comes and some drama happens or some
Yeah.
injuries happen and they kind of fall off the face of the face of the planet, kind of like the San Francisco 49ers did just this past season. But going into this, Amir, this is not in any particular order, but we combined our lists and we have about 6 or 7 teams that we think have a legitimate shot to win the Lombardi Trophy next season. We'll start with the Eagles. Like I mentioned, they're coming off an 18-3 season. They're dominant all around, and I think they have just a great mix of veterans and this youth that is playing beyond their years. They have 7 picks in this upcoming draft, and the only pieces they're really losing are Brandon Graham due to a retirement and their offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore. I think that's a big piece, but I think they have the talent that can they can overcome losing an offensive coordinator. Amir, your thoughts on the Eagles potentially repeating next season?
Yeah, for me, the last thing that I want to do every single year is obviously pick the guys that just won a Super Bowl. And, we see it every time where the people that just won are always favored, number one. But this is, outside of Kansas City, in the past decade, this is the one team that I could truly see repeating because the NFC outside of them is completely wide open. I mean, you got a team like Detroit who just lost, both coordinators who just came off an embarrassing loss. It's going to be tough for them to come back. You got San Fran who dealt with a lot of season-ending injuries,
Yes.
where for them it's going to be tough for them to bounce back. You got, Jordan Love and Green Bay. Well, for them, they still have some holes in their roster. And so really it's no one in the NFC that I could look at right now from top to bottom that's going to be able to challenge this team. And this team is extremely young. And, like this team, if they play their cards right, if they can manage contracts right, really focus on developing their players, this team could really be the next dynasty. Now, obviously, it's really tough to make a dynasty if you don't have a Hall of Fame level quarterback or, a top, 4, top 3 quarterback in the league. But this team is in a perfect spot to repeat. Perfect spot.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Chiefs dynasty, they won because, well, they of course they had good pieces all around, but they really won because they had Patrick Mahomes and
Yeah.
Andy Reid. This Eagles team won on their defense alone. And of
Yeah.
course, Saquon in the Super Bowl, he didn't have the greatest day, but he was the offensive player of the year, so he got them to that point. But I do want to say that they are built on defense. And then
Yeah.
not to mention they have maybe the most talented offense in the league as well. They have the most talent, but can they stay healthy and can they stay on the same roster and happy? If they can, if they can check all those boxes, I don't see why they can't repeat going into next season, especially now that they have the formula of just give Saquon the ball and we'll throw when we have to. And number 2 is the Kansas City Chiefs. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled. I understand that you might want to jump quickly on the hate bandwagon and you might want to be like, Patrick Mahomes has no shot of being the greatest of all time. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Brady lost 3 Super Bowls in his career. It happens when you're that great of a player and you're in the big game this many times. You're going to lose on the biggest stage. And of course, unless you're Jordan in the NBA. But for Kansas City, they're not going anywhere. They're coming off a 17-3 season. They've been to 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls. That has never happened in NFL history, and that's because they have the most accomplished coach and quarterback combination in the league. They've won 3 of the last 5, by the way. I just think they have a great mix of youth and veterans. They have 4 draft picks in the first 3 rounds coming up, but there's some questions here with Kansas City. What is the future of Travis Kelce? Is he going to come back? Are we going to try and work this out? And if he does come back, how much are we going to get him involved next year in the offense? Because this year we saw he took a step back as far as his volume in the regular season. And then when he needed to turn it on in the postseason, he wasn't the same guy. And then also the offensive line. That's been a question this entire Mahomes era. Can they address this line and protect him in these big time games? I mean, again, try and make Superman's job easier. I'll put it that way. Amir, your thoughts on the Chiefs getting back to the top of the mountain, or do you think it's just over for the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, not like people don't be fooled. Kansas City, this team is still great. They still have Andy Reid. They still have, this basically homegrown defense. Kansas City is a team where it's like this defense wasn't bought in free agency. This defense was homegrown. Completely built from the ground up, and they're honestly going to continue to still draft well, still get guys. And Brady went 10 years without winning, his fourth ring.
Right.
And in this case, that honestly won't happen. And what I would say is this too. If you guys, the GMs and owners and fans, if you want to root for, the Chiefs and not continue, do not let them get Harold Fannin in the draft because he is going to be a complete dog and will honestly give this Kansas City team, a lot more firepower for years to come, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's a very deep tight end class here, as of course I'm doing my draft research. Even if they got a guy like Gunnar Helm out of Texas, even they can probably get him in the 4th, 5th round. That's a guy that's an all-around tight end and kind of reminds you of a George Kittle with how he
Yeah,
plays the game. So even if you can't get Harold Fannin, which would be crazy, you still
that'd be
got a lot
crazy.
of value down the board if you want to address that position. And number 3, don't forget about this team either. The San Francisco 49ers. They are coming off maybe one of the most injury-riddled seasons ever, coming off of a Super Bowl run. But they have 7 draft picks going into this upcoming draft with the number 11 pick, which they can go a variety of different ways. I think they're going to address the offensive line. This is a team that, when they've been healthy, Amir, over the last 5 or 6 years, they've just been dominant when they're healthy. But that's the problem. It seems like one year they're healthy, then the next year they're just injury riddled. They just can't stay healthy. And then it's just this ever going cycle. And if history repeats itself, next year they're going to be healthy and they're going to be very, very good. They brought back Robert Saleh as the defensive coordinator. That should help tremendously as they were like the 30th ranked defense in the NFL. But there's some questions here. What do you do with Debo? He's requested a trade. Do you trade him? And if you do, what do you get back for Debo Samuel? And if you do replace him, if you do trade him, how do we replace him? Do we want to go a different direction? Or do we want to kind of get a Debo Jr. in the draft, kind of guy like Isaiah Bond or someone of that nature? Interesting questions there. Outside of that, address the offensive line. They don't have an offensive line. Brock Purdy was under pressure all season long, and Trent Williams might retire. So I think those are the big questions for the maroon and gold. Amir, your thoughts on San Francisco potentially getting back to the top of the mountain? Let's not forget they maybe have the best coach in the league as well.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I was really doing research and I was looking at every season, from this team. And you know what's crazy? This is the 22nd year where they've had either a boom or bust season, where they've either missed the playoffs or made an NFC championship. No in between. That is
Yeah,
crazy. So going into this year, it's one of those two. And my biggest concern is that your number one receiver has a torn ACL. He's coming back off an injury. George Kittle constantly deals with injuries. Christian
right.
McCaffrey, he's not 100%. We don't know if he's truly going to be back, ready to dominate. This offensive line is horrible. But the good news is you got your DC back.
Yes.
In 2019, last time they had him, as their D coordinator, I mean, that defense was electric. Amazing. Creating
Number one in the
turnovers.
league. Yeah.
Right, exactly. An amazing pass defense. That wonderful zone blitz scheme. And so, for San Fran, you're honestly in a great spot. If I'm them, I'm really focused on developing Pearsall and drafting O line. You have to really develop this offensive line, man, because like this past year, and honestly, the reason why they lost against Kansas City, in the Super Bowl was because the O line. I mean, it was like 3 plays where Chris Jones, this was let free and blew
Yes.
Brock Purdy up and saved 3 touchdowns. And, it's crazy because that final play that San Fran had the ball in regulation. Like if they go ahead and they score, Brock Purdy is holding up a freaking Super Bowl trophy.
Right.
In Kansas City, the 3-peat conversations are done. And so, this San Fran team is still in a great spot. You still got Kyle Shanahan, an amazing coordinator. But if I'm them, I'm addressing the O line, and I'm honestly really focused on developing Pearsall. And also, too, Ward is probably gone. So really, address trying to pick up a corner in the draft or free agency.
There's a lot of corners this year that I like.
A lot.
I
I like a lot of them.
I think I was looking at it. I think I have like 3 or 4 corners in my top 25 this year, and I'll share that with you guys coming up here soon. But a guy like Jahdae Barron out of Texas, he's a safety, but he
Yeah.
can play a variety of different roles. You got Benjamin Morris, if he can stay healthy, he's a lockdown corner at the next level.
Yeah.
San Francisco has their guy back. They have this mentality with Robert Saleh coming back into the mix, and he's pissed off because of how his situation ended in New York. He was used as a scapegoat. He's going to come into this year with a chip on his shoulder, as well as the rest of this roster. So interested to see if San Fran can continue this trend of boom or bust. This year would be a boom of a season. And number 4, we have number 8 and Lamar Jackson, of course, representing the Baltimore Ravens. They finished 13-6 this year, despite having the worst defense for the first 9 weeks of this season. Of course, they had Zachary Orr take over as the D coordinator, and there was an adjustment period, but they figured it out at the end of the year, and they were a above average defense, let's just say. But I think the defense gets better next year now that Zachary Orr has experience at the lead position. And hey, you still got your offense coming back, right? Lamar, Derrick Henry in your back pocket, they're coming back, and they're going to be dominant, right? Your offensive line can get better, which is something that you can address. And of course, Zay Flowers, you got Rashad Bateman. I think for me, Amir, with 5 draft picks in the first 4 rounds, we have to go out there and take a shot. Let's go out there and get that true number 1 option at receiver. Of course, Zay Flowers is a great talent, but I think he's a number 2 at best on a championship level team. I recently saw a podcast, Amir, where the GM of the Baltimore Ravens went on the PFF's podcast, and he was basically saying that they've done a really good job at building this team, but they have struggled at finding that number 1 wide receiver, as we all know. I think that's a big focus for them this offseason, whether it's via trade or the draft, and I'm excited to see who they think that number 1 can be. Now, outside of that, addressing the secondary, of course, Marlon Humphrey's getting a little bit older, and he's a little bit injury prone. And as we saw, Josh Allen was able to pick apart that defense when he needed to in that key game. Your thoughts on the Ravens potentially finally breaking this mold and breaking, getting out of this plateau where they can get there, but they can't get over the top?
Yeah, so when I made my list, I had Baltimore at 2. And the biggest reason why is because this is the perfect spot for them to finally get over that hump. And, it's just crazy because, Baltimore every year scares me more than Buffalo, scares me more than Cincinnati, because this team always has a combination of a high-performing defense and offense. And honestly, like, the strength of this team isn't even in the receiving core. It's in up front. And in this past year, I mean, really, Baltimore has a championship ready roster. And
Yeah.
so if I'm Baltimore, at this point, I'm trusting in Zach Orr, despite him, really, really, struggling beginning of the year. I'm saying, all right, he's going into his second year. Our secondary is young. Our defense should play better. So we're gonna go ahead and right away, put the gas pedal on offense in this upcoming draft and free agency.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing if I'm Baltimore. And it's crazy because this past year, you still had a great offensive line. You had Derrick Henry who ran for 2,000 yards. You had 2 top 10 level tight ends in my opinion. 2 receivers that can consistently dominate man-to-man coverage. And so this team really has a Super Bowl ready roster. But if I'm them, I'm loading up even more to make Lamar's job even easier.
And that's the thing. That's what I think these teams have to, especially in the AFC, right? You saw the blueprint now of how to beat the Chiefs. Let's go out there and model that, right? You just got to get pass rushing talent, and you got to have some offensive talent that can win their one-on-one situations, and that is how you do it. I think the Ravens need to get that number 1, make Superman's job easier.
But the biggest thing
too, get that true number 1, Amir, I think Lamar could come back pissed off and win his 4th or 3rd MVP at this point in his career.
And the biggest thing too is the fact that they just extended Monken for a period of time, and that was huge because he completely transformed Lamar as a player, in my opinion. Watching him against Buffalo and all throughout the playoffs, all throughout the regular season, some of the route concepts he was drawing up, Will Likely and Mark Andrews was absolutely amazing to watch.
Yeah. Again, Baltimore has the talent. They just need to, I guess, get that extra piece that can get them to where they want to go, which of course is more than just the AFC title game. At least let's get to the Super Bowl. But let's stay in the AFC North, Amir. Is this a bit of me being too much of a fan of this player?
Not
Maybe,
really.
but to me, I think if you want to have an argument to be in the Super Bowl conversations, you need that guy. You need that quarterback And to me, Joe Burrow is a top 3 player in the league when he's fully healthy, because this is a guy that outside of this last season, when he was healthy, he's going to the AFC title game or he's going to the Super Bowl. And this is a team that won 5 straight games to end the year. It's so weird how this team operates, Amir, because to start the year, they always start off the first 6 weeks slow, right? I think at best they're usually 3-3 after the first 6 games. If they can start the season better, I mean, this is a team that has been to 2 of the last 5 AFC title games. They have 6 draft picks in this upcoming draft, including number 17 overall. And outside of the roster questions, again, they have the quarterback and they have the number 1 go-to option. If they can just get decent play around those guys and they can survive the first month or so of the season, this is a team that, again, I think that they can be in that picture to compete for a Super Bowl next season. The 2 big questions, though, are we keeping T. Higgins? All the reports say that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase want him back, no matter what it costs. And then the other thing is addressing the defense as a whole. They got Sam Hubbard that potentially could be cut here in March. They got Trey Hendrickson. Geez, stick with me here because this is what I'm talking about, right? I got a little bit of a bug. Trey Hendrickson is a free agent on the edge as well. And of course, the rest of that defense is just terrible there in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Can we address that? And can we figure out what to do with T. Higgins? Amir, am I crazy to think that Cincinnati can get back into this picture next year?
Not really, man. And, I kind of look at 2021. I always say, come playoff time, the Cincinnati offense was kind of lackluster, but that defense stepped up. And I always bring up the stat of like, looking back at every single Super Bowl champion, it was only 7 teams that didn't have a top 10 defense
Right.
that won it, and so you need a somewhat capable defense in order to win. My biggest concern is that Burrow, you have to stop starting the season off slow because we saw this past year,
Yes.
against the Patriots, you lost, and then week 2 against Kansas City, you played good, and you get a fumble 6 that that basically gave Kansas City, the lead to win the game, and so Zach Taylor as well, they have to really hold him even more accountable. Hold
I'm not a
him
big fan.
accountable too. It's really unfair to Burrow and the whole team because Zach Taylor is leading that ship. It's way too many times we start the season off slow. You come to the playoffs, you either playing on the road or you end up just falling short. And so, if I'm Cincy in the draft, I'm focusing on defense and offensive line. That's it. And also, they got to stop being cheap. Pay your players.
Yes.
Pay your franchise guys and simply just draft better.
Yeah. I mean, again, they have 6 draft picks this year. They need to at least hit on 3 of those, I think, especially in that first
Yeah,
round.
at
Whether if it's an
least.
offensive lineman or a Tyler Warren, if he slips down to that far. Let's capitalize on these guys, even if we're taking safe picks over potential picks. Just make sure we capitalize on at least half of these 6 draft picks in 2025. Now, number 6 is Buffalo. Man, this is a team that we both weren't high on going into the season. I'm not going to say where we had them because that's embarrassing. But we weren't high on this team going into the season because we had questions. We said, okay, Josh Allen is going to be Superman. We know he's going to do that. But outside of Josh Allen, where's the help going to be offensively to keep this team in the mix? Not to mention, the defense lost a lot of key pieces. So they shocked the world. They went to the AFC title game, and they were right there to make it to the Super Bowl. But this is a team that's coming off a 15-5 season. Again, we didn't expect that out of Buffalo. They've been to 2 of the last 5 AFC title games. They have the reigning MVP, first one of his career in Josh Allen. Joe Brady, again, offensive coordinator for that legendary LSU team in 2019. He's unlocked this Buffalo Bills offense in 2024 and going forward. Of course, he's staying in Buffalo. They have 6 picks in the first 4 rounds. The questions for me with this Buffalo team, Amir, it's not Josh Allen. It's not, what's around him offensively to a degree. To me, the biggest question is addressing the secondary, getting some pieces that, like Micah Hyde, like Jordan Poyer, that were key captains on the back end of this defense that were able to help this team in the playoffs when Josh Allen maybe has a bad drive or throw, and the defense can keep them in the game. I don't think they could have afforded that this year. Josh Allen played almost perfect in the postseason, and of course, they still weren't able to get over the top because the defense couldn't make those stops when they needed. So secondary, I think, is the biggest thing for them. And for this offense, I want to ask you, Amir, you know, for the first 6 years of Josh Allen's career, he had Stephon Diggs. He had a go-to guy that he could go to 150 times a year. But now this year, they made it the furthest that he's ever been, basically, right? I think they were kind of the closest they've ever been to the Super Bowl. But they didn't have a number 1. They had just a collection of number 2s, number 3s. Your thoughts? Do you think that they should go out there and get a number 1 guy in the draft or free agency? Or do you think they should just kind of run this back and let Josh Allen and this offense just kind of do the same thing they did this past year.
Well, the one thing you don't want to do is go ahead and just waste a guy's prime, by basically looking at a roster
I agree.
and thinking like, all right, this guy just won MVP, with a lackluster roster. He was projected to go ahead and miss the playoffs, and so now, is this year a fluke, or can we really capitalize off of this? And if I'm Buffalo, I'm not taking that risk of trying to run this back, without getting a receiver. I'm not taking
Right.
that risk because this team, in the playoffs, it was really obvious this team needed a consistent guy that can consistently, beat man-to-man coverage. And they tried to trade for Cooper, but Coop. He had a major drop off this year. Drop passes. Not getting much separation. And but the biggest thing is also address his defense. That secondary has no depth in it. Hamlin had a pretty solid year, but he was up and down in the playoffs. Benford got hurt. Got hurt in the playoffs. And that immediately impacted them. And so they need more leadership, more depth on defense. That's the number one thing in my opinion. And then two, get a receiver.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, there's, I think next year, as crazy as it sounds, I think Josh Allen can have a better year next year, even if his stats take a dip. And I mean that because if they can get a number one guy and, Josh Allen only has to throw the same amount, like 15, 20 times a game, but two of those throws could be big plays down the field. I
Yeah.
think it's just going to open up this offense. And again, I don't think the offense needs to rely so much on Josh Allen if they can get that go-to guy. And you touched on it perfectly. Don't waste the guy's prime, right? So don't get complacent, right? Go out there and if you can, add a weapon to this offense. But again, I don't care if it's in the draft. I don't care if it's in free agency.
To somebody.
Don't run this exact offense back. It's going to make you, again, predictable as well going in to next season. Now, at number 7 is Detroit. This is a team that is coming off their first ever 15-win season in franchise history. Now, that, of course, entails, there's context behind that. I think they could have even won 16 games this year. They had the most injury riddled roster I think we've seen in the last decade. They had over 22 starters or second stringers out at points in this season. They were missing entire units, Amir, throughout this entire year. And they made it to the second round. Again, they got the first round bye, and me and you both picked them to win. We thought that, hey, this is a team that can make it to the Super
I thought it was
Bowl
a cakewalk
and,
because
end this
yeah,
this drought that they've had as far as at least getting to the big game. But they lost in the first round, and it was ugly. I'll just say that with Jared Goff's performance. Then they go into the offseason, and we knew that they were going to lose Ben Johnson. But then they also lose Aaron Glenn, two very good coordinators on both sides of the ball. And then that's going to be the biggest thing going into next year. How can we respond to these big changes? Because they have the talented roster, Amir. But again, losing key guys like that, key play callers, it's going to be an adjustment period. Now, they have 6 draft picks this year, including number 28 overall. They can go a variety of different ways. I've seen a lot of people say that they're going to bring in Jack Sawyer to have like the Step Brothers connection with Aiden Hutchinson, which, by the way, Hutchinson was going to be the Defensive Player of the Year before
yeah.
he got injured. So keep that in mind. They're getting a guy like that caliber back into the mix. And, they can go Mike Green out of Marshall. They can go Jack Sawyer. They can go Donovan I can't pronounce his last name, but the edge out of Boston College. They have a lot of options here to address this defensive front going into next season. Outside of that, I just think the defense as a whole needs to be the focus
Yeah.
because this offense, we know they could score with anybody. Amir, your thoughts on Detroit potentially bouncing back from losing such key pieces on their coaching staff?
This team is really weird because, despite the talent, I really believe that this window may be closed, and the biggest reason why is because, man, like, watching that game against the Commanders, it was the same concerns, we've had last year too with this team. Golf, played really really bad, and then also the secondary. I understand Carlton was out, Amik Robertson was out, but man, Kirby played terrible. Terry Young played terrible, and so it's starters that have been there, that have set that standard and that culture, that are also playing really, really bad. And also on top of that, you lose Ben Johnson, which, I'm not really concerned about Aaron Glenn leaving. But, my biggest concern too was like, I understand Dan Campbell and the GM, they really want to keep the culture intact and want to promote in the house and not go out and hire guys. But like, man, like, with the roster like this, that's Super Bowl ready,
Right.
go out and grab a proven coach. Don't go ahead and just promote in the house and boost guys up that are now first year coordinators. So now you have two first year coordinators on both sides of the ball after you just came off of Goff having probably the worst game of his career. And, this team having a complete meltdown for the second year in a row. The last thing you want to go ahead and do is just let this roster go to waste. And so this team, go ahead, focus defensively, offensively. I mean, in my opinion, they're the most loaded offense in the league, outside of Philly. And so the roster is still great, but the defense has to be the key this year. It has to be.
Yeah. I mean, when I asked you, of course, in the prep for this show, I asked you to name your top five teams. I didn't have the Detroit Lions as high as I was on them all
Yeah.
season long and in the
Uh,
offseason last year. I didn't have them because I'm worried that this is a team that is going to be kind of like the Rams going into next year, where they're going to have
yeah.
the talent and we're going to always give them a shot. But this is a team that when you lose guys like that, like Ben Johnson, who was the hottest head coach candidate
Yeah.
I think in the
That's
last
that's
decade,
tough,
and
man.
then you also lose Aaron Glenn, it's tough to bounce back from that in one singular season. So that to me, I think they're going to be a 10, 12 win football team next year, and they're still going to be in the mix. I
Hey,
just
yeah,
don't know if they're going to be
and
looked at
also
as Super Bowl
too,
contenders.
man, did you look at the Lions away schedule next year?
No, but that's another thing. Amir,
It
they're
is
going to
one
be
of the
playing a
craziest
first
things
place
I've
schedule
ever
next year.
seen in my life. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. I'm
Let
looking
me
and
hear it.
I'm like, hold on, I got to read this really quick. So road games, yeah, you got Chicago, obviously, you got Green Bay, Minnesota, obviously,
Chicago's
but
going to be decent again with the
exactly,
stacked division.
exactly, exactly. You got the Commanders, Philly, Cincy, Baltimore, Kansas City, and the Rams, all on the road.
I'm telling
That
you,
is absolutely
they're going to be
crazy.
next year's Rams.
Yeah, and the thing that's tough too about a team like this is like, it's different if they're a proven franchise, that's shown that they bounced back before, but it's like, I mean, they're already a franchise that's consistently struggled, throughout history, and so now it's like, a team like Detroit or a team like Cleveland, they're the last team that you can really expect to just bounce back and just win 15, 14 wins again. If it's a team like San Francisco, I mean, their team to completely just collapse, but it's like we've seen them bounce back.
Every
It's
time.
gonna be really tough. For Detroit to really bounce back, man, it's gonna be tough.
Well, here is, of course, a couple other teams I want to throw out there on the list, Amir. I think all these teams, if everything goes right for them, they can compete for a Super Bowl next year. Of course, you got the Chargers. They're going to be in the mix if they can get a Tyreek Hill, who that was rumored. If they can get a guy like that, I think that in this John Harbaugh scheme, or Jim Harbaugh, they just protect the football. They play football the right way. I'll put it that way, right? The traditional way. And if you play like that, you're always going to be in the mix to make a deep run, especially when you got a top five level quarterback. CJ Stroud and the Texans, I think they bounced back this year and they look a lot like they did 2 years ago when Stroud debuted. The Rams are always going to be in the mix. The Commanders, I'm not as high on them as I'm probably sure everybody else is going to be going into next year. Jane Daniels is great, but this is exactly what we saw from the Texans in Stroud's rookie year.
Yeah.
They're probably going to add pieces in the offseason. They're probably going to get a big name to come to their team. Maybe it's a Myles Garrett. But this is a team where I think that they're going to have so much expectations.
They have a lot of
I
holes
say
on
it
their
all
roster.
the time. It's one thing to have
Yeah,
expectations, it's another thing to live up to them. I think
yeah.
next year there'll be a playoff team like the Texans were, but I don't think that they're going to make a deep run. They might be a first round bounce. The Packers and the Bears. It's such a stacked NFC North division, but all four of these teams are really good and have really good head coaches. So interested to see how that works out. Same can be said with Minnesota. But what do we do with Sam Darnold? I think at least at the bare minimum, franchise tag him and give JJ a full year where he's healthy to, of course, get comfortable to the NFL level. And of course, we got to throw in there the Cleveland Browns, right? I think if everything goes right, we're in the mix as
Oh
well.
yeah, definitely
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
mean, again, all we got to do is probably trade for Saquon Barkley. All we
Yeah,
got to
for
do
sure.
is keep Myles Garrett, get
Hey,
Cam
I mean,
Ward too,
honestly,
and then
I mean,
also trade
shoot.
up and get Abdul Carter in the top three. What you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, shoot. Honestly, I say if our cars go right, we can maybe even snag like Joe Burrow or Josh Allen.
It's so sad, man.
It
If
really
you
is
made it to this
depressing.
point of video, let us know who you're a fan of. Um, we're we I talked about it with Bakari Amir. I think it's honestly time where if we get rid of Miles, I'm okay with just hitting a complete reset and tanking next year.
It's just
Grabbing
so
an
I don't
Abdul
want to watch.
Carter.
I don't want to watch this. Have to play with somebody like Deshaun Kaiser at quarterback, man. I don't feel like
Dude,
doing that.
well, because Denzel, it's going to be a domino effect. If Miles
Yeah,
wants out, Denzel already said he wants out. Joel Bitonio said he's going to retire if Miles Garrett is gone. This team is going to fall apart if Miles Garrett leaves. And it doesn't help that he's bashing the city every chance he gets, which I think is very classless for Miles Garrett because we love him, but he wants to bash our franchise for whatever reason. But again, I think there's probably 10 or so teams next year that can make a deep run for the Super Bowl picture. But again, there's a team that's going to come out of nowhere, like Vegas next year. They'll come out of nowhere because of Pete Carroll now running the show with Chip Kelly. Because that was Washington this past year. They brought in new coaches and they made this crazy run to the NFC title game. There's going to be a team that's not on the screen next year that's going to make a deep run, and we're all going to be shocked that we didn't see the potential before the season. But that is episode 253. Of course, congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles, the third year of this podcast. And it's the first time that the Chiefs haven't been on top. So thank you for the Eagles for that. But Amir, that is going to do it for episode 253. Your quick thoughts on I guess, the end of this season and going into the offseason. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Yeah, man, this was a great year of football. You literally had, in my opinion, you had four legitimate MVP candidates that all
Yes.
four of them had an actual case to win it. The NFL was extremely top of like I mentioned before the year. You had two 15 plus win teams. I think you had what two
Three.
14 win
Oh,
teams
yeah. No,
or
no.
no.
No, you're right. You're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. You had three 14 plus win teams, and so this year was a great year. I think next year is going to be the same exact way. You got teams like the Commanders that are going to be decent. Chicago's going to be decent. Even Drake, man, the Patriots are going to be even
I think
better.
they're going to be a playoff team.
Right, and so next year is going to be a great year. You got Bo Nix in year two, Jane Daniels in year two. I'm excited.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
excited,
excited
man.
to see and this sounds like me being a hater, but I'm excited to see these rookie quarterbacks in year two. Now that there's
Yeah,
film on them, of course, we thought CJ Stroud was going to be on the same level of Patrick Mahomes, and he had a down year because there's film on him. I want to see how some of these guys bounce back or get better, like Caleb Williams. We want to see him have that dominant year. But that's it. We'll see you guys next week, which I don't know what, but I will say this: coming up soon, we're gonna have our top 32 quarterbacks, which of
I'm
course
excited.
is probably going to be one of the most controversial things. But hey, we'll talk about it then. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and it was a great season.